The September heat clung to the air like a stubborn fever, a leftover burn from midsummer. By noon, the leaves on the Northwood High campus were curling inward, as if trying to escape the sun. Inside the cafeteria, it was even worse, bodies packed shoulder to shoulder, the temperature cranked up several degrees higher than outside. Everyone was complaining about the school shutting off the AC too early, calling it inhumane, while craning their necks and scanning for empty seats. "Yo, that table's only got one guy." Someone spotted a corner table, but after a closer look, hesitated. "Wait, hold up. Never mind. I think that's Sol Bennett." The group that had been about to swarm over collectively took a half-step back. Sol Bennett. The name meant sun, but the person wearing it looked like he had never once stepped into daylight. He gave off the distinct vibe of something nocturnal, a creature that slept through the day and fluttered out only in the pitch black. His oversized uniform made him look painfully thin, his skin so pale it almost seemed sickly. His jet-black hair was a bit too long for a guy and not exactly neat, a messy fringe constantly shadowing half his face. He always kept his head down, so all anyone usually saw was a tight-pressed mouth and a sharp chin. Anyone who had seen Sol Bennett had no doubt that if he were in an anime, there'd be a permanent blue-black aura oozing off his back, set to some low, creepy background music. Pure ghost core. People naturally gravitate toward warmth and away from weird, especially in a high school packed with bright, loud, energetic teenagers. A misfit like Sol wasn't exactly someone you wanted to buddy up with, so he always moved alone, classes, meals, walks, always solo. Occasionally, a sympathetic classmate would try to talk to him, but all they'd get back was a blank stare, as if he were looking at a complete stranger, and a cold, one-syllable reply. Eventually, everyone decided he was just an inexplicable, creepy loner, and stopped bothering entirely. The group hunting for seats finally got lucky and found an empty table not too far from Sol. They ate while whispering about him, sneaking glances his way now and then. But Sol, the subject of their gossip, was utterly oblivious. He was locked in serious combat with the braised shrimp on his lunch tray. After a frustrating struggle to peel the shell, the cold, gloomy teenager everyone talked about moved his lips and silently mouthed a single word. Crap. What was this shrimp wearing, shell or a straitjacket? Why was it so impossible to peel? And if it was this hard to peel, why did it taste so bad? And if it tasted bad, could they at least cook it all the way through? A full morning of classes, and this was the meal. Pure double torture, mental and physical. Dear cafeteria ladies and spoon-wielding uncles, you're doing too much, and frankly, it's criminal negligence. A perfectly good shrimp died in vain. Or wait, maybe this was an act of mercy, releasing the shrimp into the scorching oil. Hallelujah. Next time, just let them swim in the pot a little longer, okay? If his inner complaints could be written down, Sol's world would be completely flooded with scrolling text. Expressionless, he stared at his tray for a few seconds, then finally gave up on the inedible shrimp. He started poking at his bok choy and let his mind drift to the big field trip happening next week. The annual fall outdoor adventure was a Northwood High tradition since forever. At the assembly, the dean of students had stood at the podium, passionately waxing poetic about the program's rich history and profound purpose, urging everyone to embrace the autumn sunshine and strive to be model youth. Sol wasn't planning to go. Not because he didn't want to be a model youth, no, it was purely because the trip required groups of 4, and he had exactly 0 friends at this school. Joining would mean finding a group to take him in, which meant initiating conversation, which meant introducing himself. Which meant smiling and pretending to be friendly. Just the thought of it made him feel like he couldn't breathe. If that day ever came, he imagined he'd act exactly like a lizard with burned feet on a 160-degree desert rock, scrambling away in blind panic. And waiting for someone to invite him seemed just as impossible. Everyone kept a respectful distance. Sol chewed slowly on a piece of bok choy, figuring the probability of a group inviting him was about the same as the probability of him suddenly getting the bizarre urge to finish this whole plate of terrible shrimp. He was mid-thought when a shadow fell over him. Soul looked up, confused. A large, heavy-set guy with a fierce glare stood before him, arms crossed, staring down at him from above. Yo. You. Fall Trip. You're in our group. Soul blinked. Had the shrimp spirit just answered his prayers? Bobby Gats figured if he hadn't been absolutely desperate to hit the 4-person minimum, there was no way in hell he'd ever voluntarily speak to this sickly, creepy dude. Let alone invite him into his group. But desperate times called for desperate measures. After scarfing down 2 fennel-flavored churros at the cafeteria table, Bobby finally swallowed his pride and grudgingly came over to recruit Soul Bennett. You get it or what? Seeing Soul stay silent, Bobby slapped a piece of paper onto the table with a sharp thwack, then glanced impatiently at his wrist. Hurry up and sign. I'm busy. Gotta head to the office for some business. Soul's eyes followed to the guy's wrist, and the corner of his mouth twitched almost imperceptibly. Was that a drawn-on watch? With a Ferrari logo scribbled on it? He looked down at the paper, Fall Outdoor Adventure Group registration form. Soul fell into deep hesitation. Was this actually an invitation? Really? Probably. Maybe. The guy in front of him definitely didn't seem all there, though. Still, no point overthinking it. It was an olive branch, even if it looked like it had been ripped off a twisted, gnarled old tree. Besides, he didn't have anything else going on in a few days, and he'd heard the trip was to a wildlife park, which actually sounded kind of cool. Best to just say yes first. In the time it took his brain to internally draft a 5,000-word argument on the pros and cons, Soul took a small, deep breath, nodded expressionlessly, and scrawled his name on the form. Okay. Then he gripped his pen tighter, thinking he should probably at least try to show some friendliness to his new groupmate. So, with immense difficulty, he forced himself to speak again. Classmate, who are you? Bobby Gatt stared at Soul in disbelief. 3 years. From freshman year to senior year, they'd been classmates for 3 years. And Soul Bennett didn't know who he was? Bobby was about to explode. Look at this physique. Look at this face. Even an A-list movie star in his prime only just matches me, and you don't know my name. Soul felt a pang of guilt and examined the guy seriously for a moment, pondering which A-list star he could possibly mean. Maybe Chris Pratt. The bigger one. But he had to admit, it really was his fault for not recognizing his classmate. He had severe face blindness, and when everyone wore exactly the same uniform, they all looked like identical products off the same assembly line. So, after the guy, who, it turned out, was named Bobby Gats, snapped his name out, Soul buried himself in his shrimp again while silently repeating Bobby Gats a few times to memorize it. Bobby, still visibly annoyed, stuffed the form into his pocket and turned to head toward the restroom. Halfway there, he realized he hadn't exchanged contact info with Soul or set a meeting spot. He spun back around. Yo. Day after tomorrow, noon. Meet us at the West Side Market outside the school gate. Soul lifted his head from his shrimp, looking utterly lost. Classmate, who are you? Bobby? Bobby. Damn face blindness. After that agonizing second round of interaction, Soul let out a deep sigh and began to resent the world through the eyes of the face blind. He had no energy left to fight the stubborn shrimp, so he did what the cafeteria ladies must have done, showed mercy and released them into the trash can. But as he washed his hands and turned to leave, a familiar name caught his ear in the chatter around him. Wait, who's that at the door? Is that Jace Whitmore? Soul's head snapped up toward the cafeteria entrance. The silhouette already etched 1,000 times deep into his mind crashed right into his vision. The noise around him faded out, layer by layer. Everything went quiet. Time slowed in Soul's eyes, the world shrinking down to the sound of his own heartbeat, thudding slow and heavy in his ears. Truth was, he didn't fail to recognize everyone. Jace Whitmore was one of the few people Soul could identify by face alone. As for why, Soul didn't fully understand either. He'd thought about it hard once, and the only conclusion he could draw was, because Jace Whitmore was, quite simply, too good-looking. Stunningly, breathtakingly, ruinously beautiful. Sharp features, cold pale skin, broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist, with cutting eyes. Standing in a crowd, it was like seeing a full-color person in a black-and-white silent film, a 3D model in a flat 2D cartoon, 4K Ultra HD in a world of pixels. So much so that this person could break through the biological limits of face blindness and strut right into the center of Soul's vision, where he had taken up permanent residence. Soul thought again, it wasn't just in his vision, either. The first time Soul noticed Jace was exactly a year ago, also in September right after school started, the weather hot enough to make everyone irritable, but the school insisted on holding a loud, pompous sports day. Thanks to his, looks like a strong wind could knock him over, physique and his near-zero presence that made him forgettable, Soul successfully dodged being drafted into any events. But his relief was short-lived. The school then put out an announcement: during sports day, no one was allowed to leave campus or take random sick days. Even if you had no events, you had to sit on the bleachers and stay for the whole thing. Most of his classmates crammed under the small sunshade, and no one sat next to Soul. The few glances that did come his way were all, avoid at all costs, looks. Soul hesitated for a long time about whether to go over and sit with them, but the moment he caught one of those looks, he deflated instantly like a punctured balloon and decided he'd be better off just finding a random spot. Even though he could mostly ignore other people's stares by now, his mood still inevitably sank. In the end, Soul sat at a spot not far but not close to his class, with no sunshade, in over 90-degree midday heat, nearly baking himself into a mummy. The sun was blinding. The athletes on the field were just little moving dots to his slightly nearsighted eyes. He'd eaten a bit too much lunch and was sitting in the bleachers in a drowsy, food coma state. Suddenly, the world in front of him went dark, as if a cloud had swallowed the sun whole. Soul froze, then looked up, puzzled. Standing in front of him was a guy in a blue basketball jersey, his bangs wet with sweat, his naturally cold pale skin flushed from exertion. His breathing was a little uneven, but his gaze was calm. In that brief half-second of eye contact, Soul noticed his eyes were a very deep black, giving off a cool, unapproachable vibe, with a faint sense of distance between his brows. But he actually had a barely there dimple on his cheek. Even to a severe face-blind patient like him, this person was, almost unfairly handsome. But what was he doing here? Rather than aesthetic appreciation, Soul's social anxiety still dominated. He quickly averted his eyes, curling into himself like a pill bug, the dread of having to talk to someone looming over him like the dean of students' flashlight hunting for rule-breakers. After a few seconds, which felt like an eternity to Soul, the stranger finally spoke. "Hey. Mind if I sit next to you?" Soul's first thought, wow, that one sentence from Jace Whitmore kept Soul Bennett floating on a cloud for the entire day. Even the asphalt under his feet felt like cotton candy. The other students could practically feel the usual ghostly chill that always followed him dissipate a little. Soul still walked with his head down, pale and gloomy as ever, but internally, the scrolling commentary in his mind was spiraling completely out of control. He barely held it together until school ended. The second he got home, he shot upstairs at light speed, threw open the door, scooped up the cat, and launched into a seamless, 360-degree spinning Thomas flare. The sheer, universal celebration energy of it nearly made the cat's fur stand on end. Reporting in. Incredible news. Soul finally didn't have to hold back anymore. He buried his face in the cat's fur and nuzzled wildly, looking like he'd just won a $5 million lottery ticket, his voice brimming with excitement. Jace Whitmore said he doesn't hate me. The cat's originally smooth, pristine fur was now a complete mess. It had enough and pressed a paw firmly against Soul's face, shoving him away just to stop Soul from dragging it into another waltz. Sorry. Sol quickly set the cat down, neat and proper, on the table, and diligently pulled out a small comb to smooth its fur. The smile on his face was completely irrepressible, his two pale cheeks flushing a faint pink, his dark eyes curving into crescents. He looked utterly, deeply pleased. The cat swished its tail, gave a meow, a magnanimous feline pardon, twitched its ears, and settled in to keep listening to his rambling. Sol poked the cat with a finger. "He ate lunch with me today." The cat deigned not to respond. Sol scooped the cat up and held it in front of his face. "We were super close. Just one table apart." The cat swished its tail and let out a soft huff. Sol laughed, falling right back into his old habits, and buried his face in the orange fluff again. "Oh no, I think I like him even more now. I like him way too much." The cat's bristling fur suddenly deflated. Looking very put upon, it nudged its head against Sol's cheek. Meow. After a solid half-hour of breathlessly, endlessly recounting all the reasons he liked Jace, Sol took a sip of water and suddenly went quiet. Boy and cat were curled up in the corner of the sofa. The warm yellow light of the living room lamp was dimmed low, draped over them like a thin blanket. The cheerful mood from before slowly ebbed away. Sol let out a very soft sigh, hugged the cat tighter, and his voice dropped a little. "If only I could be a little braver. If only he could chat with people normally outside, like everyone else. If only socializing with classmates didn't make him so tense and resistant. If only he could shine as brilliantly as Jace, be as outstanding and welcomed. Then maybe he could get a little closer to Jace. Maybe things between them could be even better." He grabbed the cat by the scruff and placed it on his chest, looking it in the eye. "Is someone like me just, completely unlikable?" The cat stayed silent. Its green eyes reflected his image. After a long moment, it finally gave a soft meow, and rubbed the top of its head against his palm. "All right then." Sol's eyes curved up again. That little bit of melancholy in his heart melted away considerably under the fluffy touch of the cat. "At least I'm pretty good at making a cat like me." The next day was the fall outdoor adventure. The school hadn't scheduled any morning classes, giving everyone time to prepare. Sol had never taken part in this kind of group activity and had no idea what to bring. He woke up at the crack of dawn and started making himself a packed lunch. With his elite, genius parents away from home year-round, he'd picked up basic survival skills very early on. Disliking the idea of having household staff come over, he'd learned early how to be a great cook. Seaweed fried rice, pan-seared fish, rolled sushi. He cut up a huge container of fruit and baked little almond cream puffs and small butter cookies. Considering there might be some sharing among classmates, Sol specially divided the cookies into lots of small portions, wrapping them up neatly. The cat, smelling the delicious aroma, began running laps in the kitchen, inspecting the sink 1 minute, surveying the kitchen island the next. It was just about to sneak off with a piece of salmon sushi when Sol scooped it off the counter and pointed a stern finger. "That one has wasabi. You can't eat it." The cat bristled with fury, baring its teeth and hissing, puffing up into a ball of fluff. Sol couldn't help but laugh. He crouched down and smoothed its fur. "I'll make your food right now. How about some salmon porridge?" The cat immediately sat up straight, head lifted high, and gave a prim, dignified lift of its chin. Meow. There was a decent chunk of leftover salmon from the sushi, which Sol minced up finely. He threw it into a pot along with some carrots and green peas. A little goat's milk went into the broth as well, and under the heat of the flame, the rich scent of fish and milk quickly bloomed. The cat sat at Sol's feet, tail swishing, staring unblinkingly at the pot. Truth was, at the very start, Sol had planned to just feed the cat kibble. But back then, he hadn't had any cat supplies yet, and it was late and raining, so going out to shop wasn't happening. He'd ended up stir-frying a bowl of salt-free beef fried rice for the cat instead. He'd thought the cat probably wouldn't like it. But the moment the cooled-down fried rice was set down, Soul hadn't even called the cat to the table yet. A streak of orange lightning shot over and, without a second's hesitation, started wolfing it down, head buried deep. The bowl was a bit too tall. The cat braced its paws on the rim, eating with such wild abandon it nearly tipped headfirst into it. Soul had figured the cat was just starving. The next day, however, the cat food he ordered arrived. The cat sniffed every single flavor and wouldn't touch a single kibble. Its prim, reserved demeanor was worlds apart from the ravenous little demon of the day before. "Why aren't you eating? Not hungry?" "No way, your appetite was clearly huge just yesterday." A first-time cat owner with zero experience, Soul was dejectedly searching the internet while harboring intentions of just shoving the food into the cat's mouth. The cat made a gack sound, angrily jumped onto the table, and swatted the large bowl from yesterday's meal with its paw. "What do you mean?" Soul froze for a few seconds, then a sudden realization hit him. Tentatively, he asked, "You want to eat the food I cook?" The cat, utterly exasperated by this slow human, finally gave a deeply satisfied nod. Meow. Soul looked up cat food recipes and tried making a chicken breast porridge. The cat was, predictably, extremely pleased, taking big, eager mouthfuls. Cooking for someone else, some other cat, and having them appreciate it so openly gave Soul's ego an enormous boost. From that day on, he poured his heart into honing his culinary skills, dedicated to making the most delicious cat food in the world for his feline dining companion. The salmon porridge was done. He ladled it into a bowl and, once it had cooled down to warm, set it in front of the cat. The cat, who'd been waiting so long it had started dozing off, immediately jolted to full alert and buried its face in the oversized bowl, eating ravenously. The bowl was way too big and too tall for the cat, making eating a hassle. Soul had originally intended to swap it for a shallower dish, but the cat refused. It had a peculiar attachment to this particular bowl and insisted on eating this way. Soul had no choice but to let the cat have its way. While the cat ate, Soul sat beside it, organizing the things he needed to bring for the afternoon field trip. The little butter cookies, sealed in small cellophane bags tied with cute ribbons, were packed together neatly. They looked delicious. The thought of socializing with his classmates still filled him with a faint dread. Just thinking about it made his throat tighten and his breath come short. When he was feeling down, he'd think maybe he'd never be able to initiate a conversation or socialize normally his whole life. But in rare, fleeting moments, watching other classmates laugh and chatter together, arms linked and shoulders bumping, he'd feel an uncontrollable pang of longing and envy. His psychologist said that was a good sign, encouraging him to be brave and take that first step. But Soul always hesitated right at the border of his own world. Like right now. He'd clearly finished the cookies, yet as he was about to leave, he couldn't stop himself from asking the cat, "Should I really bring these? Will anyone even want them? Nobody likes me anyway. What if no one wants my cookies? What do I do? I don't know how to talk to people." The cat looked at him with its big, round eyes and licked his finger soothingly. Soul still remembered the guy from the cafeteria who'd wanted to group up, Bobby Gatz. Bobby had told him to meet at the West Side Market outside the school gate. Lugging his heavily loaded bags, Soul trudged toward the market, already nursing a headache. Picking Bobby Gatz, who he'd only met twice, out of a teeming sea of people was, to him, like trying to identify a single bean he'd seen 2 days ago in a whole handful. That might be a bit too tall an order. But luckily, his luck today wasn't bad. Before he even reached the market entrance, he heard someone shouting his name. He looked up, startled, toward the sound. 3 people were standing at the market entrance. "What took you so long?" Bobby Gatz, having arrived early, was already out of patience, waving his arms in wide, exaggerated gestures at Soul. 2 others stood beside him. One was a skinny guy who formed a stark contrast to Bobby's bear-like build. The other was a buck-toothed guy wearing glasses as thick as beer bottle bottoms. Bobby pulled out a pair of sunglasses, carefully put them on with both hands, and slouched into a plastic chair in front of the market, oozing what he thought was effortless swagger. He stuck an unlit cigarette in his mouth and said in a deep voice, "You're late. I make millions a minute. You got any idea what this delay is costing me?" Soul. He'd already pegged this guy as a bit off last time. Seeing him now confirmed it. He glanced at the two beside Bobby. The skinny one looked quick-witted and took the initiative to introduce himself. "I'm Mickey Mao, the boss's right-hand man. And this here is Benji Zhang, also a loyal follower of the boss. A couple days ago, we were so in awe of the boss's fearsome reputation that we begged to join his crew." He pointed at Benji, then looked at Soul and added, "Same as you." "Ha ha. Soul, huh? Oh. Fearsome reputation. Begged? Crew." Bobby had basically taken a pot of perfectly good rice and added nothing but oil and vinegar, a complete mess. Crushed by the weight of social pressure, Soul couldn't bring himself to open his mouth and argue. He had no choice but to glance furtively at Benji Zhang. The guy was clutching an English dictionary thicker than Soul's lunchbox, muttering under his breath, completely absorbed in his studies. Looked like he'd also been forcibly roped into this little squad by Bobby. Soul took a deep breath and took stock of his teammates, one self-proclaimed King Bobby. One Mickey, very obviously a sidekick. One prodigy in training, with ears sealed to the outside world. Soul's vision darkened. He was starting to wonder if signing up for this fall outdoor adventure had been a catastrophic mistake from the very beginning. There were still over 20 minutes until the official roll call and departure. Everyone else was laughing and chatting with friends, clustered together gossiping or taking photos. The school allowed non-uniform clothes for the trip, and the vast majority of people had changed into their own outfits, including the King, Mickey, and the Prodigy. Soul breathed a small sigh of relief. At least he could identify people by their clothes now, so there wouldn't be a repeat of him not being able to find his groupmates. He always kept his head down, rarely looking straight at people, and he didn't like facing them either. He was only lifting his head now to memorize his teammates' outfits. But this observation led Bobby to a misunderstanding, thinking Soul also wanted a smoke. "Don't be shy. Ask around, who in this area doesn't give me face?" Bobby raised a hand toward Mickey, who immediately caught his drift. He pulled out a box and held it out in front of Soul and Benji. Come on. From now on, we're all brothers. The boss has got your back." Soul stiffened. The word "no" lodged in his throat for an eternity. He turned to look at Benji Zhang, but Benji, without the slightest hesitation, took one out and stuck it in his mouth. "What? No way. Prodigy, weren't you supposed to be all about the books? Shouldn't a straight-A student draw a hard line at this kind of thing, refusing to sink into depravity? How are you just taking it? And so smoothly." Soul's mind was reeling. He gathered every ounce of his courage, ready to shake his head and refuse, but then he focused his eyes. The box was filled with rows of white chocolate sticks. He froze. Then he looked up. He hadn't seen clearly before, but sure enough, what Bobby had in his mouth was half a chocolate stick. Seriously? Were these people for real? Eating a chocolate stick, and they had to put on this whole dramatic production? Soul closed his eyes, gripped the strap of his backpack, and started calculating the odds of just turning around and going home right now. Yep. Agreeing to team up with this bunch of misfits for the field trip had been an earth-shattering mistake. Expressionless on the outside but simmering with what he thought was pure fury, Soul chewed up the chocolate stick, the sweet taste flooding his mouth. A bit melted on his fingers at the end. He frowned, wanting to find a wet wipe to clean it off, and turned to rummage through his backpack. But when he looked up, he saw Jace Whitmore, dressed in a white button-down shirt, walking up from another direction. The sweetness of the chocolate-coated Soul's tongue, lingering. He unconsciously swallowed, a faint flush rising on his pale cheeks. Never mind. He ducked his head and thought, coming on this field trip maybe wasn't a completely wrong choice after all. At 1:30 p.m., the school buses were lined up and ready outside the campus gates. The dean of students was already on his megaphone, the one with the utterly wrecked sound quality, hurting everyone to line up and board. Sol and Jace were separated by several rows of people. Even standing on tiptoe, Sol couldn't see Jace very well. Unused to exposing his face in a crowd, he had no choice but to lower his head in disappointment, thinking about how far apart they were. But then again, just being able to participate in the same activity as Jace was lucky enough. Didn't this technically count as a trip together? Maybe he'd run into him later at the park. And right, he could share his homemade butter cookies with Jace. Jace had already said he didn't hate him, so surely he wouldn't refuse his cookies, right? That would be amazing. Maybe this field trip wouldn't be so bad after all. Yo. Sol, lost in his own world, suddenly felt a firm but not harsh slap on his shoulder. Expressionless, he looked up, identifying Bobby Gatz by the black jacket with the gold dragon embroidery. The king himself looked deeply disdainful. Slow as molasses. Mickey echoed, yeah, so slow. The king curled his lip. Look at you. A stiff breeze could knock you over, and you're hauling all this stuff. Mickey echoed, exactly. Sol's fingers clenched the hem of his jacket involuntarily. The air around him seemed to freeze, making it harder and harder to breathe. Dealing with people already made him anxious, this kind of critical tone was even worse. He wanted to say something, but his throat felt sealed shut. Not a single word came out. His face paled further. Was this it? Had the trip barely started and his groupmates already wanted to ditch him? What would he do then? Would he lose his chance to give Jace the cookies and just have to go home and sob into his cat's fur? His mind was a tangled mess. But then, the weight on his shoulders suddenly lightened. Huh. Beside him, Bobby Gatz rolled up his sleeves with a grand, sweeping gesture, revealing his big Babble bubblegum tattoo. He hefted Sol's backpack with one hand and slung it over his own shoulder. This boss with the pen-drawn watch and bubblegum tattoo spoke in a grave tone. No need to thank me. We who run the streets live by a code of brotherhood. Taking a blade in both ribs for a brother is nothing. Mickey clapped in agreement. The boss speaks the truth. And casually took one of Sol's other bags. Benji Zhang looked up, silently pushed his glasses up, and said, small correction, Bobby. It's a blade in both sides. And he, too, took a bag from Sol. Sol, who'd been laden front and back, left and right, was suddenly left holding only a small bag of snacks. In an instant, he felt impossibly lighter. Even his perpetually hunched back seemed to straighten out a bit. He stared at the three of them, dumbfounded. A little light flickered in his dark eyes. His chest rose and fell a bit faster. After a few seconds, he squeezed out a tiny, mosquito whisper of a sentence. Thank you. Maybe blending into a crowd wasn't so terrifying after all. At the very least, this bunch of weirdos in front of him weren't as bad as they looked. The destination for the field trip was a mountain area in the suburbs, with clear streams and low, rolling hills. The once lush green meadows had just started showing hints of gold, but it didn't look withered, rather, it looked warm and inviting. High schoolers, normally caged up in school, were like wild horses finally freed to breathe the air. They stampeded across the hilltops. The frustrated grade-level supervisor was still yelling through his megaphone that everyone had to write an essay when they got back, but no one paid him any attention. He had no choice but to stalk off in a huff. Everyone cheered and clapped, immediately dropping to the ground to set up a grand feast. Colorful picnic blankets sprouted across the grass in patches. The tearing of snack wrappers was a constant backdrop. Sol clutched the bag stuffed full of his little butter cookies, watching his classmates' positions from a distance. He hesitated for ages. He took one step forward, then retreated. Another step forward, then retreated again. Another step forward. And then King Bobby, thoroughly exasperated, shoved him toward the crowd. Go do your little dance somewhere else. Can't you see I'm setting up the picnic blanket? Sol stumbled forward a few steps. Sorry. The feeling of people moving all around him wasn't pleasant for Sol. Every part of him was on edge, his fingers gripping the bag tightly. Standing at a distance from everyone else, his mind was racing. Are they actually sharing snacks? So I should just go over now, right? Will it seem weird? How do I go over there? What do I even say? What expression should I make? What gesture? Yeah. Is it bad if I just hand them the stuff without saying anything? Yeah. Will anyone even want to eat my cookies? What if everyone hates them? Should I really go over? Yeah. Nearby, a young couple on a picnic blanket just happened to notice Sol staring in their direction. The girl shrank back a little. Is that Sol Bennett? What's he doing? Why is he giving us that cold, blank stare? So creepy. The smile on her boyfriend's face froze too. He scratched his head. Yeah, kinda. Why does that guy always feel so dark and gloomy? Like he's wrestling with some life or death decision. You don't think he's planning to assassinate us, do you? The girl shivered. The first time I saw Sol, I thought he looked exactly like one of those pale, silent, cold-blooded teenage serial killers from the movies. We're not going to end up on the news tomorrow, are we? The guy looked horrified. For real. And he's holding something. It's not a hammer or a chainsaw, is it? Oh, crap, CR crap, he's coming this way. The tragic lovebirds looked at each other and immediately clung together, eyes welling with tears. Don't come any closer. Sol hadn't even noticed the tragic lovebirds. He was measuring the distance between himself and the larger crowd down to the millimeter. Quietly, edged a little closer. Edged a little more. Good. This distance was just enough for him to reach out and drop the stuff off. His psychologist had advised him to take it slow. Sol figured that while he did have some desire to integrate, asking him to actively chat with others right now was still way too difficult. Sharing food was a normal ingratiating gesture. Giving snacks to everyone should probably serve the purpose of friendly socializing, right? And so, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Sol Bennett, head lowered, movements deeply suspicious, demeanor utterly bizarre, crept forward clutching a bag. Like a spy planting explosives, he stealthily deposited the bag on the corner of everyone's picnic blanket, then immediately spun around and vanished without a trace. Everyone froze for 3 seconds. Then, in a collective panic, they scrambled backward in a semicircle around the bag, treating it as ground zero. What's Sol doing? Doesn't he usually stay miles away from us? Oh no. You don't think he's got something against us, do you? Is he gonna kill us? What is that? A bomb? The brave class officer stepped forward and tentatively poked the bag. After confirming it wouldn't explode, he carefully opened it. Everyone stared, unblinking, holding their breath. What is it? The class officer's expression was dead serious. He examined the contents for 2 seconds and, with the utmost professionalism, delivered his verdict. If I'm not mistaken, these are cookies. The tragic lovebirds, still clinging to each other and trembling, nodded in dawning comprehension. Ah. So it's poison. In the span of 10 short minutes, the rumors about Sol had evolved from teenage serial killer to Miaojiang poison wizard and finally to elite assassin masquerading as a high school student. The bag of little cat-shaped butter cookies was carefully placed at the very edge of the picnic blanket, regarded with distant reverence, utterly untouched. After returning to the company of Bobby, Mickey, and Benji, Sol found himself glancing over at the cookies 3 times a minute. Each glance triggered an internal sigh. Nobody was eating his cookies. And they were the super delicious, ultra adorable. Jace's original plan had been simple: build a good relationship with Sol Bennett, get invited over to his place, and use the opportunity to take the cat back. And that was exactly what he had started doing. Eating lunch with Sol at school. Inviting him to share a meal during the field trip. Helping him hand out cookies. He had thought Sol would be happy, and they would become good friends. And Sol was indeed happy. But whether they were becoming friends was now seriously in doubt, because Sol had gone home and told the cat something else entirely. He liked Jace even more. Jace had always known Sol liked him. Long before all this, he had noticed the person who always followed behind him, who stole glances at him, who walked the paths he had walked. Back then, he hadn't thought much of it. It wasn't until he heard Sol say it directly to the cat that he fully understood. This person genuinely liked him. But Jace had always treated the concept of liking with a kind of indifferent detachment. He had never liked anyone himself, couldn't really comprehend it, and always felt it was like catching a cold. People just occasionally fell into that kind of state, but they'd get over it soon enough. So it wasn't something to worry about. Except Sol liked him. And because Jace had been getting closer to him, Sol now liked him even more. That was when Jace finally realized the fatal flaw in his plan. Wasn't this exactly like leading someone on? Letting them hope when you knew exactly how they felt. Giving them no real promise while dangling affection in front of them? How was he any different from those jerks who played with people's feelings? Would Sol be heartbroken? Thinking of those eyes, like rain-soaked stars, Jace felt a sudden tightness in his chest. No matter what, he didn't want to make Sol unhappy. So Jace made a decision. Before he could figure out a new method to get the cat back, he had better stop being so close to Sol. Maybe he could put some distance between them for a while. Just like a cold eventually goes away, once Sol got over it, maybe they could really be friends. That night, Sol again went to bed very late. He was at home unpacking his backpack from the field trip, the cat sitting nearby and watching. The sushi and cream puff containers were empty. There were a few pieces of fruit left, and the cat was sneaking bites on the side. Sol glanced over. "Did you eat some dragon fruit?" The cat, its paws stained red, shook its head guiltily. "Meow." Sol had no choice but to grab a wet wipe and clean its paws, muttering, "Fine. Cats can probably eat dragon fruit anyway." After finishing with the paws, he continued organizing. He took something out and held it up warningly. "Dragon fruit is fine. But this thing is very important. You cannot sneak eat this." The cat leaned in, curious to see what treasure this was, and watched Sol pull from his backpack a carefully wrapped empty soda can, cushioned in 3 layers of packaging. Identical to the one already in the liquor cabinet at home. The only difference was one was full, and this one was empty. Sol cradled it in his hands like a precious artifact, looking incredibly pleased. He held the can up in front of the cat to show it off. "Jace gave this to me." The cat. After that, Sol promptly raided his parents' liquor cabinet again, compressing the survival space of their alcohol even further. He shoved all the bottles into a corner and cleared out a second spot in the center for the empty soda can. After placing it, he didn't forget to warn, "Cat. Don't you steal this." The cat gave an indignant yowl. "Meow." As if it would even want to. Sol finished tidying up, took a shower, and then spent half an hour holding the cat while admiring his collection in front of the liquor cabinet. By the time he actually got into bed, it was past midnight. During their customary pre-sleep chat, Sol's eyes were half closed. The warm yellow light of the small bedside lamp spilled onto his face, giving his skin a milky, soft quality. The cat licked his cheek. Sol cracked an eye open. "What? You hungry?" He got out of bed and opened a can of cat food, sitting on the rug and watching the cat eat while thinking. "I'm kind of hungry too. If only I could have those fried buns from outside the school gate tomorrow morning. Cat, they're super delicious." He frowned. "But there are way too many people in the morning." If I want some, I'd have to wake up at least half an hour early to wait in line. He placed delicious fried buns and precious sleep time on opposite ends of a mental scale, considered them seriously for a moment, and finally, with a heavy heart, gave up on the fried buns. The consequence of going to bed late was that the next morning, Seoul was a chaotic, frantic blur of panic and speed. He brushed his teeth with one hand while heating up the cat's breakfast with the other. He washed his face, grabbed his bag, threw on his uniform in one seamless motion, hurriedly said goodbye to the cat, and bolted out the door, even forgetting to grab some bread for his own breakfast. School started at 7:30, and arriving after that counted as late. Seoul successfully made it to the school gates at 7:28. He couldn't help but glance toward the fried bun shop just a few meters away. That irresistible aroma drifted all the way over, and naturally, the line of customers stretched just as far. So frustrating. The moment he was most helpless was exactly when he encountered the breakfast he wanted most. He clocked in just in time, pained and resigned, silently vowing to wake up early tomorrow. Wait. Hold on. He thought he smelled fried buns inside the school. And it was getting stronger. Was he so hungry he was hallucinating? Confused, Seoul rubbed his temples. Suddenly, he heard someone call him from behind. Seoul. He spun around and saw Jace Whitmore standing there. Even in the ordinary blue and white school uniform, he looked striking. His expression was the usual polite but distant one, and in his hand was an insulated bag with the fried bun shop's logo on it. Huh. What a coincidence. So Jace also liked delicious fried buns. Wow, truly excellent taste. And he'd actually managed to brave the line and buy some. He must have woken up super early. As expected, good food was universally loved, and anything Jace liked became even more delicious. This meant he definitely had to wake up early tomorrow so he could eat the same breakfast as Jace. This was really too. The next second, Seoul's train of scattered thoughts screeched to a halt. Jace, standing across from him, extended his arm straight out and held the insulated bag in front of him. Breakfast. For you. Jace lowered his eyes and looked at him, his face expressionless. Consider it a trade for the sushi yesterday. Jace had clearly told himself he couldn't do things that would make Seoul misunderstand anymore. But the moment he thought about the pitiful way Seoul had said he wanted fried buns, he couldn't sleep. It felt like the tip of a cat's tail was brushing back and forth across his heart. So after a whole night of dreams involving buying fried buns and not being able to buy fried buns, Jace finally woke up extra early. Fine. This is the last time. After delivering this breakfast, he would absolutely put distance between himself and Seoul. He promised. The warmth of the fried bun seeped through the bag and into Seoul's palm, feeling especially warm in the slightly chilly morning. Seoul stared at the bag for a full 3 seconds. His face was blank. He was seriously wondering if he was dreaming. How was there someone as kind as Jace Whitmore in this world? Seoul's brain synapses were firing at maximum speed, rapidly trying to figure out what he should say to present himself well in front of his crush. Based on his years of experience reading novels, comics, and watching movies and TV shows, he should obviously tilt his head up at a 45-degree angle, look at Jace, smile, and say, "Thank you so much. You're so nice to me. I'll bring you breakfast next time, too. Oh, and can we have lunch together? That would be the perfect answer." Expressing gratitude, giving a compliment, showing affection while being demure, closing the distance without being ambiguous, and setting up a lunch date along with a next breakfast date. He was truly a cunning, multifaceted, love strategy genius playing hearts like a master. So Seoul resolved to do just that. He lifted his face and looked toward Jace. After 3 seconds of direct eye contact, his courage completely deflated like a punctured balloon, and all that came out was a very tiny, "Thank you." Internally, Seoul smacked himself 100 times over. Seoul Bennett. You have utterly disappointed me. I'm furious at your failure and mourn your misfortune. You are the worst Soul Bennett among all the Soul Bennetts I've ever taught. Next time you're with Jace Whitmore, you absolutely cannot fail like this again. He clutched the breakfast bag tightly. Suddenly, someone gently brushed aside his bangs. Jace leaned down a little closer, looking at him seriously for a few seconds. Keeping your hair over your eyes all the time must be uncomfortable, right? This should be a bit better. Remembering those beautiful, round, dark eyes he'd seen when Soul had lifted his head earlier, Jace instinctively added, "Your eyes are really pretty." The words were already out before Jace suddenly realized what he was doing. He paused, pulled back a little, and fell silent. Soul also paused. Maybe he hadn't failed that badly after all. How could a person break their own vows so quickly? He had clearly decided that before Soul got over it, he couldn't do any more of these things that would cause misunderstandings. Yet not only had he failed to resist bringing Soul breakfast this morning, he had also failed to resist telling him his eyes were pretty. Jace sighed inwardly and made a second vow. Next time, he would absolutely keep his distance from Soul. Yes. To neutralize any misunderstanding the breakfast and the compliment might have caused, he needed to be colder. Having eaten the delicious fried buns gifted by his crush, Soul's mood all morning was fantastic. In his head, gongs and drums pounded as "Fortune's Favor" played on loop. Although outwardly he still looked as blank-faced as ever, there was a subtle, almost imperceptible difference. It was as though, while still a gloomy little mushroom that grew at night, he had quietly transformed from a puffball into a sunflower. Even the classmates around him were murmuring that Soul Bennett had seemed a lot more alive lately. Soul thought this joy would last all the way until school ended so he could share it with the cat. But in reality, his good mood came to an abrupt halt during PE class. Fourth period PE was the last class before noon. Soul's class had it together with Jace's. By the time class started, the sun was blazing. Everyone was hungry and tired, wilted by the heat, each one looking like a pitiful little enoki mushroom in a field. Soul's physical stamina was abysmal. From the very beginning, he had strongly resisted any sport requiring teamwork. His genius parents' expectations for him had dropped so low they could drop no further, so he had eventually been granted the special privilege of not participating in PE. While everyone else lined up to run laps, Soul would wander around the sports field, walking here and looking there, before finding some random corner to sit down and watch Jace and his friends play basketball. Sunlight filtered through the gaps in the trees and scattered across his face. He squinted, not quite used to it, but didn't move away. Soul felt a rare sense of ease. That oppressive, drowning pressure that had always plagued him before had mostly disappeared. He lowered his head and gently picked up a tiny ant that had strayed from its group, placing it back with the main column. Maybe he should try to take one more step toward the sunlight. Toward the crowd. Before class ended, Soul paced 3 circles in front of the vending machine by the sports field. He hemmed and hawed, hesitated and wavered, and finally clenched his fist and waved his hand to buy a cold bottle of water. Jace had bought him soda before. Jace had said they were friends. Jace had even brought him breakfast this morning. In all fairness, him giving Jace a drink was perfectly normal too. Right. This was normal social interaction between normal people. The first normal step onto the bright, broad, normal road of life. Soul took a deep breath. The bottle was cold, beaded with condensation, but in his hand it felt burning hot. He switched it from left hand to right hand to left, mentally rehearsing his lines. Greeting someone was simple. All he had to do was say, "Jace, here, have some water." His lips moved silently, repeating the sentence over and over. He was determined not to freeze up like this morning and fail to get a full sentence out. By the 25th time he had repeated it, the bell rang. Jace grabbed his uniform jacket and walked in his direction. Their eyes met without warning. Soul's heart instantly accelerated to max speed. His mind went blank for a second. What was he supposed to do? Oh, right. He was supposed to give Jace the water. Simple. Greet him first, then hand him the water. Jace would say thank you, and he would say you're welcome. Just simple, normal social interaction. Easy as pie. Then Sol stepped forward, gathered every ounce of courage, and began to speak. But the first word hadn't even left his mouth when Jace, as if he were just some random classmate he'd brushed shoulders with in the hallway, gave him an extremely cold, curt nod, and then turned his face away. Normal social interaction had collapsed before it was even halfway done. The word soul hadn't gotten out, stuck in his throat, unable to come out or go down. He stood there frozen. It was a long time before he remembered the cold water in his hand. He'd been holding it for so long that his left hand had gone slightly numb from the chill. Why was Jace acting like this? Was he unhappy? Or had Sol done something wrong? Jace's sudden coldness landed on Sol like a chunk of ice dropped into a cup of hot water. While the ice did chill him a bit, cooling his enthusiasm somewhat, it didn't take long before Sol melted that hard, cold, awful thing away. He optimistically figured that maybe Jace was just in a bad mood today. Things would probably be fine tomorrow. The partial judge Sol in his heart convened court. The defendant, Jace Whitmore, was charged with cold attitude and inconsistent behavior. According to the laws of this dynasty, the sentence should have been 3 to 6 months of severing ties. But the presiding judge Sol reviewed the defendant's past record, immediately slammed the gavel, and declared him not guilty by reason of Jace had said they were friends. Sol had never made friends before. He guessed that this was just how it was between friends. Being a little forgiving was the right thing to do. That evening when Sol got home, he only briefly hugged the cat for 5 minutes. He completely skipped the usual routine of dragging the cat into singing, dancing, gossiping, and spinning around for a solid 3-hour emotional exchange the moment he stepped through the door. The cat was actually a bit thrown off by this. It tiptoed around the living room twice and, seeing that Sol really was being unusually subdued, had no choice but to trot into the kitchen to see what he was doing. Meow. The cat stood on the kitchen island, lifting its head to see if Sol was making its dinner. But instead, it saw Sol baking cream puffs. Deeply disappointed, it ran around furiously, then let out an indignant yowl, attempting to use its fury to grab Sol's attention. Meow. Sol, who had been crouched in front of the oven with his face practically pressed against the glass, finally noticed the cat. He came over, scooped it into his arms, and returned to crouch in front of the oven, staring at the little cream puffs spinning inside. The warm light shone on Sol's face. His skin was pale, and just then it took on a golden, caramel-toned glow. When he broke into a smile, he looked incredibly sweet. He rubbed his cheek against the cat, eyes curving. Cat, Jace brought me breakfast today. Those super delicious fried buns I told you about last night. Tell me, isn't he just the best? The cat had no desire to answer that kind of talk and swished its tail perfunctorily. Sol didn't mind at all and kept rambling. Gotta return the favor. I'm baking cream puffs for him. He seemed a little unhappy today. I put in a little extra sugar. The cream puffs weren't finished baking until late into the night. They were lemon chocolate flavor. Sol carefully placed them in a paper box, and even tied a ribbon around it. It looked beautiful. The ribbon was from some gift box he'd received in the past, sparkling with little star patterns. It was just too long, so Sol spent ages cutting it with scissors, even nicking his finger in the process. He paid it no mind, continuing to wrestle with the ribbon until he'd tied the most beautiful butterfly bow. The cat came over with a tissue in its mouth to wipe his hand. Only then did Sol wipe away the little drops of blood. He rubbed the cat's head and, in a very good mood, cleaned up the kitchen. After the kitchen was spotless, with the sweet scent of baked goods still lingering in the air, Sol carried the already fast asleep cat to bed. In his dreams, he spent the entire night rehearsing exactly how he would give the cream puffs to Jace. In Soul's dream, he wasn't afraid of people at all. He swaggered onto campus, holding the cream puffs. He wasn't the least bit nervous around Jace either. With the full, commanding aura of an overbearing CEO, he smacked the box down onto Jace's desk with a thwack. "These were made specially for you. Eating sweets makes people happy. I put in extra sugar for you on purpose. If you don't believe me, the cat can testify." Then, out of nowhere, the cat appeared and immediately meowed in agreement. Soul patted the cat's head and looked at Jace. "So next time you're unhappy, come find me and eat some cream puffs. Don't give me the cold shoulder again." Jace nodded. Jace said okay. After waking up, Soul spent a full 5 minutes reminiscing about this perfectly logical and wonderful dream, firmly believing it was a prophetic one. Unfortunately, he forgot that dreams and reality are often opposites. For example, today, he absolutely could not swagger onto campus, unafraid of everyone. Instead, as usual, he drifted in like a ghost, head down, silent. He also couldn't deliver the cream puffs like an overbearing CEO. He was so nervous it took him ages just to quietly place the box at Jace's side. And Jace did not, as in the dream, nod and say okay. The paper box with the beautiful butterfly bow was blocked by a hand and pushed back. The refusal was unmistakable. Jace's face was expressionless, but his eyes were even colder than usual. He looked slightly impatient as he rubbed his temple. "Thanks. But I don't accept breakfast from other people." He said it, turned around, and walked away without lingering another second. Under the dark green fir trees on campus, only Soul remained, standing frozen in place. That word, other people, slammed into Soul so hard it made his head spin. In his daze, he thought he even heard a faint cracking sound. It took him a while to realize what it was. Ah! The sound of his heart shattering. He held the box of cream puffs, his head hanging even lower than before. The toe of his shoe rolled a little pebble on the ground. A long time later, he finally started back toward the classroom. Was Jace still in a bad mood today? The partial judge this time didn't have nearly as much confidence as he slammed the gavel. The delicious lemon chocolate cream puffs ultimately fell into the hands of monkeys. On his way back, Soul ran into Bobby and Mickey. Because of his severe face blindness, the initially distraught and dazed Soul didn't even recognize the two at first. It wasn't until Mickey called his name several times that he realized they were talking to him. "What's up with you? Why do you look like death warmed over?" Bobby, who considered himself a loyal, righteous man who would take a blade in both ribs for his brothers, cracked his knuckles menacingly at the sight of Soul's state. "Didn't I say I'd have your back? Who messed with you? Who's not giving me face?" Mickey echoed, "Yeah." Struck hard and utterly dispirited, Soul's voice was dark and hollow when he spoke. "Jace Whitmore." Bobby and Mickey's tough guy fist-cracking motions instantly froze. "Huh?" Soul, his soul halfway to the sky, shook his head and said nothing more. Remembering how much they had seemed to like cream puffs last time, he simply handed the box over. Then he turned and drifted away like a ghost. Just looking at his retreating back, you could see the dense storm clouds hanging over his head. It really needed a sad Eru soundtrack. By the time he got back to the classroom, morning reading had just begun. Soul reached into his desk to pull out his language arts book, and his fingertips suddenly touched a long, flat plastic box. What was this? He frowned and pulled it out. A box of Band-Aids. Soul's downcast spirits couldn't recover from that deathly state all morning. When the final bell before lunch rang, everyone immediately scrambled out the door, racing toward the cafeteria at speeds that could smash the school's 100-year-old track and field records. Soul was jostled to the very back of the crowd. He carried his tray to the most secluded corner and ate slowly. As he ate, his mind kept drifting back to the morning's events. The food in his mouth instantly turned to cardboard. So frustrating. Before, whenever he thought of Jace while eating, his appetite always got better. A feast for the eyes had turned into a bane for the eyes. He suddenly felt a surge of irritation and took a huge bite of food. Glumly, Sol poked at the unpalatable meal. When he was about halfway through, he felt a strange premonition and looked up. And there he was, right on cue, the very person who had turned his meal to sawdust. The culprit, Jace Whitmore, was still wearing that same cold, distant expression he always had in front of others. But even so, he was still impossibly handsome, standing out in his school uniform like a crane among chickens. He was holding his tray and, as if by accident, turned his head. His eyes happened to meet Sol's. They stood apart, gazing at each other across the streams of people, just like last time. Sol's heart immediately seized. He bit down on his spoon, his heart pounding hard. But this time, Jace didn't walk over. He didn't even give a cold, perfunctory nod. He simply looked at Sol as if he were a complete stranger, then without the slightest hesitation, turned around, found another empty table, and sat down. It was as if, from start to finish, he had never even noticed the person named Sol Bennett. Sol's spoon clattered onto his tray. His already shattered heart was now completely pulverized. Jace had distinctly said that if they were friends, eating together was perfectly normal. The rain cloud over Sol's head drizzled softly. He finally had no appetite left at all. Silent and out of place, he sat amidst the noisy world. So now, they weren't friends anymore. He didn't know what normal social interaction looked like. He just guessed, disheartened, that the shelf life of friendship was this short. Expired milk makes you sick. Expired medicine poisons you. So what about an expired friendship? Was Jace toxic to him now too? From that morning until school let out, Sol's mood had been on a continuous downward spiral. He was like a deflated balloon, and anyone could see the gloomy, wilted emotions hanging all over him. The balloon boy's soul drifted home like a ghost. The moment he opened the door, it was as if every last bit of air rushed out of him. He slumped against the wall and sank onto the little cushioned stool in the entryway, and without a word, began to cry. The cat, who had been lounging on the windowsill swishing its tail, had been waiting for Sol to burst in as usual, all excited. To cuddle up and tell it everything he'd seen and heard that day. But it waited and waited until its tail was tired of swishing, and still no one came. The cat frowned. Something was very wrong. It immediately jumped off the windowsill and padded quickly over to the entryway, positioning itself right in front of Sol. And was immediately ambushed by a big, fat teardrop that landed right on the fur on top of its head. This time, the cat didn't bristle. It carefully widened its eyes, studying Sol for a moment, then reached out a paw and gently hooked it around Sol's sleeve. Meow. The tone was long and drawn out, like a comfort. Another large teardrop fell from Sol with a plip. The emotions he'd held back all day finally broke free. Sobbing, he bent down and scooped the cat into his arms, carrying it further inside. It was the kind of cry where you tilt your head back and wail at the sky. Sol rarely cried this hard. He had thin skin, and as soon as he cried, the rims of his eyes and the tip of his nose turned red. His long lashes were drenched, and he looked absolutely pitiful. The cat had no idea what to do. It hopped anxiously across the coffee table, dragging over a pile of chocolate bars for him. The result was Sol instantly crying even louder. He held the cat close, crying and casually using it to wipe his tears. Jace Whitmore is even less human than you. I hate him. The cat froze, bewildered. Meow. But Sol buried his face in the cat's warm fur and, in a small, choked voice, added, "What do I do? I still like him so much." That night, Jace again couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk in his pajamas, frowning as he rustled through test papers, his mind a tangled mess. After over an hour, he hadn't solved a single problem. The pen was meant to be working through complex formulas on the paper, but somehow, what came out were the characters of Soul's name. He sighed. His head was filled with Soul's damp eyes, his face flushed red from crying. Unconsciously, his fingers rubbed the corner of the test paper, as if wanting to wipe away someone's tears but unable to do so. That test paper was eventually put away, still blank. Jace sat silently at his desk for a moment, then pulled a journal from the drawer. He was a very disciplined and organized person, used to planning his daily schedule in advance. It helped him feel prepared and smooth no matter what he did. For example, yesterday, he had written in his journal, "Plan to distance myself from Soul Bennett." Underneath was a small notation: "The aim of this plan is to adjust my attitude towards Soul Bennett, thereby preventing him from sinking deeper into a meaningless infatuation and helping him get over it sooner. Once he realizes his error and turns back, we can become true friends." Day 1 of the plan was divided into 3 columns: restore normal classmate-level social attitude towards Soul. Do not talk to Soul. Do not eat with Soul. Expressionless, Jace checked off each column. The last row was for reflections on the plan. His pen paused. He lowered his eyes and was silent for a moment before writing, "Result, failure. Reason, on the first day of execution, I regretted it." Jace could still clearly recall Soul's hurt, disappointed expression when he had ignored him. He also vividly remembered the solitary figure of Soul eating alone in the cafeteria, head down. Soul's tears had been warm. They fell into the cat's fur like a tiny lake. When he cried, his voice was so quiet, so full of wronged sadness. Every time Jace remembered it, his heart ached a little more. He hadn't wanted that. He just hadn't wanted Soul to misunderstand his actions and sink further into a one-sided crush. But he also didn't want Soul to cry. He didn't want Soul to be heartbroken. And he definitely didn't want Soul to hate him. Was there really no other way? Jace rubbed his temple and sighed again, thinking this was harder than any exam. But regardless. He thought again of that lonely, dejected silhouette. At the very least, he couldn't let Soul stay so alone. Jace had never really understood why Soul always acted so gloomy and cold in front of others, refusing to interact. At home, he clearly talked so much and laughed so happily, acting so lively. He couldn't fathom the reason behind this peculiar personality. But from what he could see now, Soul did genuinely have a desire to blend in with people. Jace thought that was a good thing. Having more friends would be good for Soul's disposition. And besides, if he had more friends, Soul probably wouldn't focus so much on him anymore. Soul would meet more interesting people, find someone he liked more. And then, they could genuinely become friends. That night, Soul curled up in a corner of the big bed, hugging the cat. He had cried himself to sleep, dried tear tracks still on his face. The cat swept the tip of its tail gently over the corner of his eye. Jace closed his eyes and silently whispered goodnight. Unsurprisingly, the next morning, Soul overslept again. He frantically brushed his teeth and washed his face, opened a can of food for the cat while scrambling to get his things together, then grabbed his backpack and bolted downstairs. The apartment complex gate was about 300 or 400 meters from the subway station. Given Soul's physical condition and running speed, which fell far below the high school average, it took him 3 whole minutes and left him completely winded. But today, under the dire threat of being late, contestant Soul Bennett clocked a personal best of 2 minutes and 58 seconds. He tapped his card at the station gate and braced his hands on his knees, gasping for air in small, ragged breaths. Having skipped breakfast and just sprinted an impromptu morning marathon, stars were bursting before his eyes. This was so frustrating. What was with this fragile, crumbly cookie of a body? Once he got home, he was going to start eating protein powder for meals. Soul grumbled internally. But the moment he forcefully straightened up, his vision went black. He stumbled, nearly pitching forward, but a hand caught his wrist just in time. Soul instinctively flinched, unaccustomed to any physical contact with others. He tried to pull away, but when he looked up, he froze. Jace Whitmore. What was he doing here? You okay? Low blood sugar, probably. Seeing Soul steady, Jace released his wrist, his brows slightly furrowed. You haven't eaten breakfast. Soul didn't answer. He was still trying to process what was happening. A 3-minute sprint, a heavenly reward, and his crush drops from the sky. His heart instinctively queued up fortune's favor, but he hadn't forgotten that just yesterday, this person had given him the iciest of shoulders. He smashed the mental pause button before the song could even start. Soul was the type of person where, if someone took 99 steps toward him, he'd be willing to take one. If someone took 1 step away, he'd immediately retreat 18,000 miles. Although his crush on Jace might grant that 18,000-mile distance a bit of a discount, right now, he couldn't pretend nothing had happened. His long lashes lowered, hiding the look in his eyes. He pressed his lips together and avoided Jace's gaze, still silent. He was a little lost about what Jace was doing. Wasn't he all cold and unresponsive yesterday? Why was he acting normal again today? Could he actually be an alien imposter? Soul's mind began to wander, quickly debating whether the good Jace or the bad Jace was the alien. He was just starting to count on his fingers which one seemed more human when their train finally arrived. It was morning rush hour. The crowd on the platform surged forward. Missing this train would definitely mean being late, but there were so many people. Soul hesitated for half a second. His wrist was caught again. Jace did his best to shield him from the press of the crowd, pulling him into the train car in a few steps, then guiding him down into the only empty seat. The sea of people was packed and noisy, phone calls, chatter, a wailing child all blending together. Soul tilted his head up and found himself face to face with Jace, who was standing right in front of him. Jace seemed to only just then realize he should let go of his hand. He released it and rummaged in his uniform pocket for a moment, then opened his palm toward Soul. It was a piece of chocolate. Eat some candy first. Jace shook the paper bag he'd been holding in his other hand. I brought you breakfast. I'll give it to you when we get to school. As he spoke, Jace still wore that same expressionless face, but his eyes and tone were gentle enough. Soul stared at him, stunned for a few seconds, his eyes brightening slightly. This felt so familiar. This flavor was so familiar. At that moment, Soul wanted to sob with relief and shout, "Who is this? Isn't this his peace and love spreading, kind-hearted, beautiful campus angel?" Clearly. The bad Jace was the alien imposter. The judge slammed the gavel and pronounced solemnly, "Jace brought breakfast. Good Jace. The alien who ignored people is the imposter. Bad alien." The sweet, rich taste of chocolate melted in his mouth, the sugar spreading and clearing Soul's foggy head considerably. The stars swimming before his eyes faded. He crinkled the plastic candy wrapper between his fingers as the two of them stood in silence for a moment. Finally, Jace spoke first, his voice very soft, tinged with regret. "Soul, I'm sorry. The way I treated you yesterday was terrible." He looked down at Soul, his dark pupils reflecting Soul's image clearly. It was because. Jace faltered, not sure how to explain. Should he say, "I deliberately tried to distance myself because I was afraid you'd keep liking me"? That felt too harsh. But in those few seconds he hesitated, searching for words. Soul, in a muffled voice, finished the sentence for him. "It's because my personality is really bad, right?" Soul said it and then dropped his gaze. The chocolate was gone, leaving only a slightly bitter aftertaste. He thought his logic was perfectly sound. His personality was terrible. He didn't like to talk, couldn't communicate. That was why no one wanted to be friends with him. But the next second, Jace leaned down closer. As if worried he couldn't be heard clearly in the noisy train car, he moved even nearer, the pad of his finger pressing gently against Soul's cheek, tilting his face up so their eyes met. "Soul." Don't say that. Jace frowned, his dark eyes gazing at Sol with utmost seriousness. The way I treated you was completely my fault. Don't call your personality bad. Right now, I'm the one asking for your forgiveness. That sentence hit Sol with the force of 10 cats rolling over and waving their tails at him. His eyes widened slightly, and his voice grew even smaller. Forgive what? I'll bring you breakfast every day from now on. Jace rubbed his nose, looking away awkwardly, and cleared his throat softly. Can you not hate me? From leaving the subway station, entering school, receiving Jace's breakfast, and heading to the classroom, Sol remained in a completely dazed, out-of-body state. That one sentence, can you not hate me? Looped endlessly in his head, traveling from left brain to right brain and back again, echoing and echoing. He still remembered the way Jace looked at him when he said it, those deep black eyes holding only him. They had been so close he could almost count Jace's eyelashes. According to the standard script of movies, TV dramas, and romance novels, what should clearly happen next in a scene like this was, stop. Sol rubbed his burning ears and took a deep breath, ordering his brain to stop thinking. Before morning reading started, he opened the insulated breakfast bag. Inside was a bottle of milk and a sandwich. Excellent. He was going to add this milk bottle to the liquor cabinet collection, right next to the 2 soda cans. Wait. Hadn't Jace just said he'd bring him breakfast every day from now on? It looked like it was time to throw out all his parents' random liquor bottles and shove them into the storage closet. Oh, and what else had Jace said? The whole way here. His mind had been completely consumed by that one line. Sol made a conscious effort to recall while munching on the sandwich, and his chewing came to an abrupt stop. He remembered. Jace had said, let's have lunch together today. To Sol, receiving a lunch invitation from his crush was equivalent to an 11-year-old receiving an acceptance letter to a school of magic. His previously gloomy mood was swept entirely clean. His spirits soared. Even his voice during morning reading was a little louder than usual, chanting classical texts while simultaneously looking forward to the wonderful lunch that awaited in 4 hours. He transformed from a gloomy little puffball mushroom into a shiitake that could produce 15 suns, and then into a giant sunflower capable of 25. The morning was a double block, 2 hours of math followed by 2 hours of English. Normally a textbook recipe for dozing off, but Sol didn't close his eyes once. From early morning to noon, he was wide awake and full of energy. The moment the lunch bell rang, he was out the door. Passing the full-length mirror at the back of the classroom, he happened to glance at his reflection. Pale skin. Dark, gloomy expression. Hair covering his eyes. Blank face. He looked like some kind of villain. His footsteps faltered. Then he remembered what Jace had said last time. Your eyes are really pretty. In just 2 short minutes, his classmates had stampeded out like starving tigers. The empty classroom was left with only Sol. He stood before the mirror, staring at himself for a moment. Tentatively, he reached up and lifted his hair slightly. Oh. This way, he didn't look quite as gloomy as before. And he could see things much more clearly. It didn't seem too bad. But without the hair blocking his view, he wasn't used to it. And wouldn't the chance of accidentally making eye contact with someone increase drastically? What if he met someone's gaze? Just thinking about it was terrifying. No. Better to put it back to how it was. Sol still wasn't comfortable with the idea of looking straight at people without any cover. He raised his hand, ready to brush his hair back down, but just as his fingers touched the strands, someone gently stopped him. Jace had appeared at the door at some unknown moment. He studied Sol seriously for 2 seconds, a rare hint of a smile in his eyes. You look beautiful like this. Lifting his hair and revealing his eyes seemed like a sign of actively confronting his social anxiety. Jace had always thought Sol needed more friends, so now, of course, he would encourage it. He helped Sol smooth down a few messy strands, but because Soul's hair was naturally soft, stray pieces kept slipping down from his forehead. Jace had no choice but to let his hand drop. He asked gently, "Does it feel weird?" Soul couldn't help but lower his eyes again, avoiding direct contact. He nodded, but after 2 seconds, added, "But it's okay." Okay meant he didn't hate it. Jace's lips curved very slightly. "No rush. You'll get used to it." The midday sunlight streamed in, gilding Soul's hair with a layer of golden brown. Jace thought again of the feeling of touching Soul's hair earlier, smooth and warm. He unconsciously rubbed his fingertips together. He was suddenly struck by a feeling similar to spotting a super adorable but super timid stray cat on the street. He really wanted to pet it again, but he was afraid of scaring it off. So he had to hold back for now. But no matter what, the fact that Soul was willing to lift his hair today was a sign of progress. And Jace was a firm believer in clear rewards and consequences. So he said, "I'll buy you some little hair clips to wear." Hair clips? Hair clips. Soul's eyes widened. A mushroom cloud detonated inside his head. The cloud dispersed, and a downpour of colorful little hair clips rained down, plastic ones, metal ones, fluffy ones, knitted ones, utterly burying him. His face was red, his heart was pounding. Immersed in a sea of hair clips, he thought dazedly, was this something you just casually gave? Was this really normal social interaction between friends? Wasn't this a little too ambiguous? Last month, he and this aloof genius crush were complete strangers. This month, the guy was offering to buy him hair clips. Was that logical? Was any of this logical? Clearly, the good Jace was the alien imposter. Thankfully, Soul was a mature high school student. No matter how fiercely the storms raged inside him, his expression remained utterly immovable. He rapidly ran through a mental catalogue of hair clip colors, styles, and materials. Then, demurely changing the subject, he asked quietly, why are you here?" Hearing this, Jace looked down at him, raising one eyebrow slightly. "Forgot already? We agreed to have lunch together today. So of course, I'm waiting for you." Soul sucked in a sharp breath. The second mushroom cloud exploded in his chest. "Good Jace, even if you are an alien, it doesn't matter. I'm officially on the side of the extraterrestrial visitors." The cafeteria was crowded and buzzing. As Soul and Jace walked in, they ran right into a few guys who looked like they had already finished eating and were on their way out. They seemed to know Jace, waving and calling out from a distance. "Jace! Jace! Perfect timing, man. Got something to tell you." The guy in the lead jogged over. "Our club's test flying the A-31 next Friday. Don't forget, okay?" Before he even finished, his eyes landed on Soul, and he said, surprised, "Oh, hey, who's this?" Suddenly put on the spot, Soul flinched. Still deeply unaccustomed to interacting with strangers, he instinctively ducked behind Jace, his fingers unconsciously clutching at the cuff of Jace's sleeve. Out of habit, he lowered his head, but had forgotten that his hair was partly lifted. Now there was nothing to hide his eyes. His usually blank face showed a clear trace of panic. He looked just like a timid little animal, the kind that was so pitiful you wanted to catch it. Jace glanced back at him, understanding that dealing with social anxiety needed to happen step by step. He didn't say anything, letting Soul cling to his sleeve. He spoke for Soul instead. "Soul Bennett, Class 7. He's my friend." Oh. The guy scratched his head, completely unbothered by Soul's cold demeanor. He grinned at Soul casually. "I'm Zach Zhu. Gotta run. If you're interested, come hang out with Jace next Friday." Only then did Soul quietly poke half his head out from behind Jace. He summoned every ounce of his courage and gave an extremely tiny nod. For lunch, the two of them ate the legendary noodles the school's teachers and students ardently worshipped. In a place where most cafeteria food was barely edible, these noodles, smooth, chewy, fresh, and richly flavored, were one of the few true delicacies. Even though the line was always impossibly long, whenever Sol had the time, he would tirelessly wait in it. The only downside to these noodles was the carrot slices in them. And not just any carrots. These were half-boiled, half-raw carrot slices coated in a sweet and savory sauce. Just thinking about that texture made Sol's whole body cringe. Since childhood, he had hated eating this rabbit food. He had even once thought carrots were his natural enemy, to the point that one bite would be instantly fatal. Occasionally, when he didn't feel like cooking at home and ordered takeout, if he accidentally got a dish with carrots, Sol would decisively rinse them off with clean water and toss them into the cat's bowl, coaxing the cat by saying it was good for vitamin A. Over time, the smart cat had gotten used to it, even automatically sweeping any carrots from Sol's bowl into its own. Just like Jace was doing right now. Sol suddenly looked up. Wait. Something wasn't right. Sol watched, frozen, as Jace separated his chopsticks, reached over into his bowl, and picked out the carrot slices. The motion was so fluid, so natural, so seamless. The two of them looked at each other. Both froze. Both fell silent. They stared at one another. Jace's movement stopped for a full 3 seconds before he slowly put his chopsticks down. He fixed his gaze on Sol and said, with the utmost solemnity, "Actually, I really, really love carrots." Sol's cheeks reddened bit by bit, blush spreading. He nodded dumbly. Ah, oh. Oh, haha. So it was because Jace really loved carrots. And here he'd thought their relationship had already progressed to the point where they could naturally eat off each other's plates. How frustrating. How could Jace navigate the boundaries of their relationship so skillfully? Was this the social talent of a normal person? Wait, no. Good Jace wasn't a normal person at all. He was an alien. Exactly what was his purpose on Earth?